A man who looked like a monster from the movie Alien stood on the battlefield. In his hand was someone's head. Drones were flying behind and shooting into the distance. Demon King. The result of human hatred and arrogance that destroyed the old world. Holy Sword. A powerful weapon that has absorbed the deity of the old world and gives its owner strength comparable to the strength of the god himself. The various weapons from the sword to the pike glowed with different lights. A man in a black suit was reading a book near the fireplace. His face was covered with a huge magic cap. Until now, there are 5 known comings of the Demon King to our world. 5 times he threatened people's lives and the harmony of the whole world. To confront him, the fire raged wildly. The one who was able to master the holy sword appeared. A hero has appeared. Who pierced the Demon King with a sword and saved the world. A man in a black suit stood with a book near the fireplace and told all this to the audience. A blonde girl was sitting at the table, a brunette man was sitting opposite her, and another man in a blue jacket was watching all this. Suddenly, the man in the black suit hit the table with his fist and said loudly. But now the Demon King has appeared once again and has already occupied the territories of Gliss and Lance. The 2 men sat and listened to the story with smiles on their faces. He can launch an attack on the capital at any moment. The girl listened carefully to the narrator. The next moment, a man in a black suit adjusted his hat and a yellow dark eye glowed from behind the huge hat. The man continued the story. But the hero never revealed himself. After all the holy swords were lost during past battles. A question came from the table to the narrator. What can we do? Just wait for the end of humanity to come? Suddenly another man in a blue jacket with long hair and green eyes exclaimed. No. We can't let this happen. I will find a new holy sword. A guy in a green jacket drew attention to the man. But the man in the blue jacket continued. And I will become him, a new hero. And then, we will save this world. This is the goal of my life. I'm Mark Turquoise. Mark with 2 swords stood next to a man in a black robe. All the listeners and the narrator stood behind Mark. Everyone knows this hero, the adventurer of the turquoise Mark. A huge tree stood in the foreground, and behind it was a beautiful picturesque city. On that day, Mark had to accept the patronage of the supreme god Asilius. And together with his group he headed to the Temple of the Gods, located near the World Tree. The next moment, the turquoise Mark and the black-robed man stood opposite each other in fighting poses. Mark looked at the man with a surprised look. A man in a black robe was holding what looked like a priest's censer. "Uriah," said a man in a black robe and directed his stream of magic at Mark. The right hand of the hero Mark, the sorcerer Maurice, suddenly betrayed him. The next moment, Mark dodged the attack of the sorcerer Maurice. Mark stood opposite the sorcerer Maurice, holding 2 swords in his hands. Maurice turned out to be a powerful black magician. He killed his students, the warriors Emilia and Matteo. However, that's why he even killed Saint Mina. A girl with a blank dead look and blood from her mouth and nose. Suddenly, the sorcerer Maurice began using a magical attack on Mark again. I riot. Maurice raised his hand to Mark himself and tried to kill him. But the next moment, Mark stood in a defensive fighting pose, holding 2 swords in front of him. However, the attack of the sorcerer Maurice did not work, and Mark repelled the magical attack with his swords. Couldn't cope with the hero's awakened holy sword, Ilis. And then another holy sword, Lucia. Mark suddenly widened his eyes and was surprised by something in front of him. Mark stood in a fighting pose after parrying the blow. Mark pierced the traitor sorcerer. The next moment, Mark, with a smile on his face, asked the sorcerer Maurice a question. This is how I plan to present it. What do you say? The sorcerer Maurice was wounded and held his wound with one hand and held his sword tightly with the other. Mark stood behind him and called his name again. Maurice? However, sorcerer Maurice did not want to give up so easily and tightly grabbed the blade that pierced him. Yes, screw you. It was you yourself, Mark, who killed everyone, wasn't it? Mark, with an open mouth and a surprised look, answered the sorcerer. Yes, that's why you will remain in history as a sorcerer, condemned by a hero for betraying his comrades. The next moment, Maurice stood opposite Mark and asked in surprise. What? Mark continued his sentence further. Tell me, Maurice, how many holy knights do you think there are in the world? In order to be the highest-ranking hero among them, I needed to sacrifice you. Maurice put his sword away and stood on the destroyed ground. Suddenly Maurice became angry with Mark for his statements and began to argue. Did you need all of us who accompanied you on your travels just for this? Mark walked away from Maurice and was surprised by his words. Maurice was shocked by his statements and asked Maurice again with surprise on his face. Only? The next moment, Mark raised his blade to the side and continued. Look. Having absorbed the divine power of Saint Mina, Eyeless turned into a holy sword. Raising his sword to his head, Mark continued. And the holy sword Lucia will receive your black magic and become a magical sword. And I will get both swords. Mark's look was murderous after these words. And I will become the strongest of heroes. Mark stabbed Maurice again. Maurice grabbed his sword. Ugh. Since when did you become like this? The next moment, Mark, with one movement of his sword, took off Maurice's sorcerer's hat. And behind the hat there was a not very neat man, more like an orc. Marcus said with an ominous face, throwing his hair a little to one side and holding his sword tightly. From the very beginning. Otherwise, I would have taken someone like you as a comrade, don't you think? Sorcerer Maurice with a tired, beaten look and blood on his lip. His look no longer gave any hope of survival, and in his tired voice he asked Mark. What about Mina? Mark stood not far from Maurice. Behind him were fragments of earth from the battle with Maurice. The same. She had divine power, but was of low birth. What kind of friend is she to me? We all loved you, Mark. They respected you. Maurice exclaimed heartfelt words to Mark. But Mark at that moment had already pressed Maurice against a wall with his sword and kept him motionless. However, with tears in his eyes and a broken face, Maurice continued to tear at Mark's soul. We are here for you. We lived only for you. You couldn't tell from Mark's face that he sympathized with Maurice. He was just a little surprised, but his gaze remained just as cold. If so, will you die for me? Mark had a crazy smile on his face. His eyes rolled back at the words Maurice said earlier. The next moment Mark exclaimed. Die already, I don't have time to bother with you. Greater things await me. However, in the next moment, Mark was surprised by something. There was shock on his face. Magic power increasing? Mark thought to himself. The next moment, a circle of blood formed around the sorcerer Maurice, more like a ritual. Mark was completely shocked by what he saw, his eyes widened, and his mouth could not close in surprise. Suddenly, the sorcerer Maurice pushed Mark away and jumped down with a sword in his chest. Maurice, what are you doing? Mark exclaimed. Around them the ground was cracking, and huge stones were flying in different directions. Maurice was flying in the air and screaming. I was saving this for the battle with the Demon King. Suddenly Maurice spoke. Forbidden magic. Maurice was in the air when suddenly a huge scary skeleton began to crawl out of the ground. On top of him was a circle of blood, which summoned him. The next moment Maurice spoke. Removing restrictions on the source of magic, I give my life to it. The skeleton began to fill with blood. Suddenly Mark realized the whole picture of what was happening in front of him, and with a crazy look, in a panic, began to shout to Maurice. Maurice, stop. Nothing stopped Maurice, and he was near the skeleton, which was already created up to the ribs. The entire room was crumbling and breaking from the flow of magic from the epicenter of the event. Mark continued to scream madly, and Maurice said his last words with a sad face. Mark. Mine. Dark. Cold. Very cold. Somewhere in my memories these words flew. In the next moment, the farmer stood and worked on his farm. He had a pitchfork in his hands and in front of him was a stack of hay. Behind him stood a pig. In my memories. The farmer wiped his right eye and looked into the distance. The city was empty. The buildings looked more like small chicken coops. And behind the chicken coops stood a huge mansion. The narrow street only divided into two directions, up or down. In the next moment, someone was holding the severed head of a chicken tightly in his hand. Blood flowed from her neck in a huge stream. This blood dripped onto our farmer's head. One of the black silhouettes was holding this chicken, and behind him there were several more of the same silhouettes, laughing at this situation. Holding your eye. The farmer was very upset by this situation, blood and tears mixed into one mixture. Suddenly, unexpectedly, someone hit one of the crowd with full force. The next moment, Mark stood and protected the farmer, who, in tears and panic, covered himself with his hands while squatting. It is vile for a crowd to attack one. Moving his hand to the side and looking at the offenders. They began to run away in panic and screamed as they ran. Georgia. It's Mark. Let's run. After making sure that all the offenders had run away, Mark extended his hand to the farmer, who was beaten, and his right eye was already swollen from the beatings. You can get up? Yes. You gave me, who has no parents, a status lower than livestock. The huge mansion stood among the trees, and the path led to the doors. Maurice. Warm house. This farmer turned out to be Maurice, who walked behind Mark and looked at all the objects in the house. Mark turned towards Maurice and spoke. Your miasma is a real talent. Suddenly Mark found clothes for Maurice that were several sizes larger than him. I wouldn't want to lose them. Maurice was shocked by what was said. But Mark continued his sentence. For starters, it would be nice for you to become a sorcerer. Looking at Maurice, Mark said with a serious look. Maurice. Maurice turned to Mark and listened carefully to what Mark would say next. Knowing what you live for. The most important thing in life. Grabbing Maurice's shoulder. Maurice asked in surprise. Is it true? Mark continued further. You must constantly think about what the meaning of your life is. These words brought tears to Maurice's eyes, and he nodded in response. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Maurice dissolved in his own magic of absorption into the skeleton, and with an angry face shouted these words, remembering the moments that he had with Mark. Will not forgive. Maurice remembered Mark's crazy smile. All that was left visible of Maurice was his eye and his nose. The rest has already been corroded by magic. Ayu. 5 years later. The girl stood near the horse. And around them stood deserted mountains with destroyed flora and fauna. The girl stood in protective glasses and, looking at this, said everything. Here they are, the land of the world tree. A land covered in the miasma of Maurice, the traitor sorcerer. They take life from everything, even the world tree has dried up. They say that without special training, even saints will not last even 5 minutes here. Black trees and dark fog filled the ground ahead of the girl. The girl took off her glasses and held them in her right hand. There was a hiking backpack on the ground. I wonder what the atmosphere is like there? The horse began to shake, but the girl, going up to the horse and taking it by the face, turned it towards her and began to calm it down. Are you afraid? Everything will be okay. I, a saint of the highest rank, have even gone on expeditions to the spirit world. The horse's eye was filled with a black dilated pupil. Well run. The girl said. The horse began to run away, and the girl waved after the horse and screamed. Thanks for your service. Everything goes according to plan. The order of knighthood did not expose me. The girl took her backpack and spoke. I will definitely find him. The next moment the girl ran at great speed towards the cliff. Suddenly the girl jumped and grabbed the hang glider, which opened in front of her. Hang gliding around beautiful mountains and landscapes. The girl spoke. Holy sword to Lucia. Dark, scary forest. The trees were withered. There was clearly no life on this earth. Corpses and remains lay in the middle of this forest. The girl standing in the middle of this picture was talking to herself. Miasma devours life. And this is what happened in the end. If it weren't for the holy stone, I would also be in danger. The holy stone was sacred on her chest. This miasma is like a huge beast. And now I am in his stomach. Even the world tree withered in such conditions. The girl shone with a white aura and stood out against a background of this gloomy, dark forest. Judging by my information, Maurice gathered his remaining strength and drowned the entire region in a whirlpool of dark gloomy magic. Everyone except the hero Mark died, but the local landscape has survived to this day. The girl continued to walk through the forest and look around. These gloomy trees really make any life that enters this area disappear. Looks like the holy stone won't last long. Although the holy stone shone with a white aura, as an object it still could not stand in this environment and began to crack. Is that why holy knights don't come here? What if Lucia's sword also rotted? It turns out that I was in vain to travel so far. The girl was talking while she was walking and stepped on something. Raising her head up, she saw a huge dark, scary tree. It was a world tree that used to be beautiful and neat. And now it has turned into a terrible scary tree. Touching the tree with her fingers, the girl said. Once upon a time, the faith of many people gathered here, once a huge world tree. Surprisingly, it has shrunk in size. It has dried up completely. I don't feel the power of the gods or signs of life in it. But something suddenly distracted the girl, and she paid attention to something. It was a sword stuck into a tree. The girl was happy because it was the sword that she had been looking for a very long time. Thank God Lucia's sword was not damaged. Taking hold of the sword, she immediately fell to her knees. What is this? Why does the sword take away my strength? Moving away from the sword, the girl sat and thought what was wrong. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a voice appeared in her head. Miasm. The girl got scared and thought, whitening her eyes. Voice? Telepathy? Magical energy began to accumulate around the tree. The girl stood in a tense position. A voice around the tree spoke. It's hard. Cold. However, the girl was not entirely happy with such a greeting from the tree. Cold sweat dripped from her face. She was shocked by what she saw. It turns out that the local miasma has consciousness. They must have retained the remnants of Maurice's consciousness. The girl spread her arms to her sides and looked forward. Ahead of her there were streams of magic around a dark tree. Listen to me, Magician Maurice. I, Saint Lion Baron. Give me the holy sword, Lucia. The girl stood in a defensive position, crossing her arms near her face. A magical whirlwind flew towards her. He understood me and attacked. Looking at the holy stone, the girl thought. Suddenly, the holy stone shattered into pieces. It's rubbish. The holy stone failed. The girl could not withstand such power of magic and fell to her knees from the blow. Don't you dare brush off the walker to the spirit world. The girl put her palm to the ground and said. Anti-magic superpower barrier. Scorpion. A huge scorpion came out of the ground and destroyed everything around. Columns of smoke filled the area. The girl stood in a half-bent position inside the epicenter of events. I received this power during my wanderings on the holy mountain of Benners. If you hit the ground, a powerful protective barrier will appear that can withstand even the attack of the Demon King. Therefore, what is left of Maurice will not be able to penetrate him. The girl put her hand to her head and said. TC. It's true that I won't be able to get out of it myself. The next moment she sat down on the ground and began to communicate with Maurice. Damn. Hey. Are you the one who was once the black magician Maurice Bermond? You understand me? The girl said into the void. You wanted to tell me something, but for some reason our conversation didn't work out. Maybe we can find a way to talk after all? Pressing herself to her feet, the girl continued. Although you don't have a physical body. How to be? Suddenly the girl's gaze suddenly changed to one of surprise, and she came up with something. Opening the bag with her things, she began to look for something. Somewhere here. After a moment, the girl put together a robe from improvised materials that looked like a little knight. Quite good in such and such a situation. She said. Suddenly, the girl bit her finger. Now. Starting to draw a ritual sign from your blood from your finger. You need a summoning seal. Throwing the created knight doll high up. The girl said. Here is a container for you. Black magic flew into the doll, filling everything and everyone around. The girl clenched her hand into a fist and said. So great. The next moment, a field of magic formed around the doll. The girl was very surprised by what was happening in front of her. Her eyes widened. Looking at the doll, which began to stand up. She simply silently watched Maurice, who moved into the doll. The next moment she asked him. How do you like it? Maurice began to turn his head to the sides, getting used to the new vessel. He clenched and unclenched the gloves he had been given. This is your body now. As long as you are behind a barrier, the miasma cannot harm you. Have your sight and touch returned yet? The girl asked. And by moving the air inside your body, you can speak. The girl suggested to her new friend. Now I want you to tell me your name yourself. Have you forgotten human language? Are your memories preserved? The girl approached the small doll. Around them the earth was broken to smithereens. Carefully watching the doll, the girl heard the answer. Hey you. It looks like nothing will work out. After all, he's just a blob of air. He has no brain, so he cannot think. Distressed, the girl thought to herself. Well, okay, since the evil miasma has dissipated, I'll try to get the holy sword. The girl began to move away from the doll. The next moment she approached the sword, which was stuck in the terrible world tree. Which suffered from Maurice's miasma. Then the goal of my journey will be achieved. She said over her shoulder to her new acquaintance. However, a new acquaintance extended his hand using some of his spells. Hey. The girl looked at the doll smilingly and thought. In this state, did he recognize the holy sword? Suddenly the sword flew out of the tree straight towards the doll. The girl was very surprised by this and at first did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, the sword was right in the hand of a new acquaintance, and there was a huge pop of magic around him. Stones flew in different directions due to the power of the spell. What? Did he pull out the sword? The girl was completely shocked by what she saw, because even she could not get the sword. And then the doll she created calmly pulled him out. The doll was holding his sword. Behind a robe, the bones of the corpse were visible, wrapped in this robe in some places. The eyes from under the knight's helmet took on a form. The white eyes that looked from under the helmet directly at the sword spoke. Fabulous. The girl was still in shock from what she saw. Cold sweat began to flow under her right eye. The next moment, two huge horns sprouted from his helmet. His intellectual level increased sharply from contact with the holy sword? But how can this be? The girl paused a little in her conclusions and asked herself a question. Was his consciousness trapped in the sword? A knight who has already incarnated into a human-like form. He stood opposite her. And behind him stood dark, scary trees that had died from miasma. The entire area was filled with fog. The girl exclaimed to her new friend in shock. "You." The girl stood opposite him with a surprised look and realized that this was not a joke. The fear of what she saw was visible in her eyes. The girl asked a question. "Who are you?" A knight with the same cold gaze. Two white circles were visible from under the helmet. "Maurice." Maurice Bermond. The next moment, Maurice raised his hand to his helmet. He exuded a terrible aura and a thirst for murder and revenge. "I am the one who will kill the hero Mark," said the knight. Although it's clear from his past what he went through with Mark. And then the sharp betrayal, for which he sacrificed his life to kill Mark, turned out to be insufficient. His anger was genuinely real. "I'm Maurice Bermond. I'm the one who will kill. Hero Brand. Miasm." Maurice said out loud while looking at the girl. The girl was surprised by this and said, "Yes, they cause incurable diseases. Almost all victims die very quickly, but there are people who manage to survive. Tech, who are called black magicians." After this, surprise was visible on Maurice's face. Black magicians can grow a new organ that dispels miasma, and thanks to it they survive. True, they have now become victims of discrimination. Due to the fact that under the influence of miasma, their appearance changed greatly. People mock them and look down on them, they have become the scum of society. But people make mistakes because black magicians. They have an innate gift. Black magicians can transform miasma into magical power and with its help become powerful sorcerers. Anyone who possesses the abilities of black magicians is worthy of endless gratitude. This is what is written in Reflections on Black Magicians. And yes, it was I who once wrote this book. Maurice was surprised by the girl's story and asked, "Did you happen to teach at Otter University?" The girl nodded her head and answered, "Yes, I'm Lion Baron. It is a great honor for me that such a great sorcerer like you knows about me." Maurice leaned forward in respect and said, "There is no one in this world who does not know about you. It's an honor to meet you. Your works have changed the world's opinion of us. I'm glad I was able to read them." Maurice answered, holding out his hand. "And you also resurrected me. Thanks to you, Professor Lion." Maurice replied respectfully. The girl shook Maurice's hand and told him, "Just call me Lion." The next moment, the girl, looking at the knight Maurice, thought to herself. What was previously just an insensitive miasma acquired the knowledge and honor of that same Maurice. Holy Sword Lucia became Maurice's brain. He also said that he was going to kill Mark's hero. If so, then we will most likely be able to become allies. Suddenly, somewhere in the sky, someone was flying on a dragon. Lion and Maurice noticed this, and the girl thought to herself. Same. Dragon Knights? Two people were sitting on a dragon. The man who was in front clearly did not have a kind look. Danger. If the miasma dissipates, he will notice us. Taking Maurice's hand, the girl shouted. These Dragon Knights. Surely from the order subordinate to Mark. The girl said this with fear on her face. The girl began to peek out from behind a huge root, a dark tree. What's there? What's happening? Maurice asked a question. Hurry up and hide in this hole. Nobody should see you. The girl said sharply to Maurice. But Maurice didn't understand what was happening. The next moment, the girl continued to explain the whole situation. Bad people have come here. Surely they are hunting for the holy sword. I will try to deceive them, and you hide there. Maurice did not answer and remained silent, looking at the girl. The next moment, Maurice nodded his head and said. Understood. I obey you. Suddenly, Maurice began to climb into the hole that was in the tree. Lion told him over his shoulder. Thank you. Maurice said further. You can't give them the holy sword. The girl agreed with this. The huge dragon was looking for a place to land. A huge paw stuck into the ground. His claws were very sharp and dangerous. Steam came from the dragon's mouth, his teeth were huge and sharp as reefs. The next moment, the dragon opened its mouth and stood next to a girl and a man in clothing similar to Mark's people. The man began to speak. It's surprising that the miasma has completely dissipated. What happened here? The girl answered, looking at her companion. This must be the work of that pilot flying towards the Valley of the World Tree. The glider of which we saw a long time ago. Even we could not get close to these lands. We need to find him and interrogate him. However, the next moment the man was surprised that someone stood opposite him. Hello. For some reason, the miasma suddenly dissipated. Amazing, right? Lion said. Who are you? Did you come on that glider? A girl from the squad asked a question. Yes. Yes. It wasn't easy. I thought of flying through this ominous valley, but a gust of wind came and I fell into the forest. Lion answered. If so, why are you still alive? It is impossible to survive while in the miasma. A girl from the squad asked a counter question. The man frowned. Suspicious. You're hardly an ordinary little girl. Lion began to scream, her anger visible on her face. Who is this little girl here? I am 59 years old. The man was very surprised by this and said. What? But you don't look 59. Assessing the figure, he answered. Look at this, Santana. There are traces of the use of some kind of protective barrier. The girl squatted down and looked at the seal summoning circle. Reporting the situation to your companion. Can't be. So this barrier eliminated the miasma? Even Mark himself could not cope with them. The man answered sharply. Suddenly, hearing the word Mark from the context of the conversation, Maurice tensed and said it out loud. Mark? In general, I don't know anything. Maybe you can take me to the other side of the valley? They're waiting for me there. Lion said calmly, not counting on anything. Dangerous moment. They must not be allowed to recognize Maurice's presence and that I am a saint. The girl broke out into a cold sweat. Then I won't be able to fool them. Hey, please. The squad did not pay attention to her. Can I ride a dragon with you? I'm even ready to pay with my body. Lion begged and tried to somehow lure these two detectives. But everything is useless. Approaching the tree, the man looked at the slot where the sword was. These marks. Lion continued to scream at the two. Hey. What do you think? Are you not interested in me at all? But the man turned sharply to Lion and asked. Where is the holy sword? Lion was surprised by this question and asked again. Holy sword? And this is the weapon used to fight magicians? I've never even seen anything like this. The next moment, the man pressed his sword to Lion's neck. Lion was frightened by this event. Hirdo, get yours. A man from the squad turned to his girlfriend. Eat. The girl took out her sword and pointed it at Lion. Lion didn't understand what was happening and asked. What are you going to do? A holy sword resonates with another holy sword. While the valley was covered in miasma, the holy sword Lucia located here did not respond to our blades. But now he must answer. Must answer my holy sword and I. And Urim, holy sword of Hirdo. The man and girl swung their swords at each other. The explosion from the contact of the swords was so loud that Lion covered herself from the blow. And what does this strange sound of swords give you? Lion sarcastically asked two people from the squad. They didn't answer Lion and just stood there silently. Suddenly the man said. I can hear him. At this moment, Lion was surprised. Eh? A sound came from the tree. Maurice, sitting in the tree, was in a panic from all this that happened in a few minutes. Lucia. Maurice spoke.